Two people can search the same flight at the same second and see two different prices, based on your phone, your history, and what an airline thinks you'll pay. Congress spent the day on how a shrinking airline market decides what you're charged.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stout, there are four big players, right? Four big airlines. Yes. United, Delta, American, and then Southwest is big, but not quite as big as the other three. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then there's a second category, this low-cost carriers, and sort of in the middle. Mm-hmm. And that's people like JetBlue and airlines like that. And then you have the super low cost, the ultra low cost, Frontier, Allegiant, and others. Right?
Correct.
That's the state of play.
So far, yes.
Okay. And one of the guys in the middle was going to buy one of the guys in the smaller category. Is that right? JetBlue was going to buy Spirit.
That's right.
Okay. Oh, by the way, what are the big four? What percentage of the airline industry are the big four?
About, the numbers I've seen are about 75%, but I've heard 80 or a little bit lower
80%,
today.
75, 80%, so pretty big. Yeah. And then the JetBlue Spirit was going to be what percentage of the business then?
I don't remember the exact number. If that
merger would have happened?
It was a much smaller percentage.
Yeah, but I heard like 10%?
It was something like that.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. And then, so this is proposed, I think, a couple years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago. And then a couple years later, it's like Justice Department sues, says, no, you can't do it. This is bad. Ms. Rose says it's terrible. And it all falls apart. Is that right?
That's correct.
And we got this famous tweet now from Senator Warren. She said, I've warned for months that a JetBlue Spirit Airlines merger would have led to fewer flights and higher rates. Seems to me now that Spirit's went out of business, we got fewer flights and higher rates. Is that true?
I believe that is correct.
Yeah, maybe if they would have merged, we wouldn't have that, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, Ms. Rose said that, she said JetBlue was going to raise prices 30%. Would raising prices 30% still be lower than the big four?
It would, and it would also still provide airline service where now there's none.
Right.
So,
right, and there'll still be lots of employees at Spirit probably still working.
Right, effectively the price is infinite now because there is no option.
How many Spirit employees lost their job, you know?
I actually don't have that number, sir.
17,000 people lost their job because the Biden DOJ said, no, we don't want a middle-class, lower-cost airline buying a super low-cost airline. Even if they raise prices 30%, it's still lower than the big four. They would account for 10% of the market and be able to compete against the 80%. What am I missing in there? Is that accurate?
No, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, but the Biden administration said, no, we can't do that. And Elizabeth Warren even said it's going to help consumers when today, in fact, because Spirit's out of business, there are less flights, less people working, 17,000 people out of a job.
That's correct, sir.
And all they want to do is talk about the Trump administration antitrust?
Well, and part of the problem is that this is an antitrust doctrinal problem. So the Biden DOJ was actually pursuing antitrust case law the way it is established, and I think that's part of what I've been trying to be here today to convey is that we do, I think, in fact, need to think about out-of-market efficiencies when we're looking at these competition concerns, because JetBlue providing more and extended service was a benefit to consumers that was completely discounted under current antitrust doctrine. I think this committee has the jurisdiction to solve that problem.
I think we do too. Mr. Ravitch, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would add something like this, which is Spirit is an example of deregulatory success. They created a completely fresh innovation that actually...
so fresh they named it after them, right? What's called the Spirit.
Right, their yellow planes were remarkable.
Shazam, that's like, oh, they were so unique, so new that they actually called it the Spirit effect in the airline industry. Imagine that.
Yes, sir.
And Elizabeth Warren says, no, we're going to put them out of business. Not let them continue. We can't let JetBlue buy. Oh, we can't have a merger because 5 big people competing would be somehow harmful to consumers when right now it's 4 big players. That makes no sense to me. I didn't mean to jump in. Keep going.
No, I have nothing to add. Mic drop on that.
Yeah, okay. Governor, you get the last minute to hopefully educate the committee on why we need to do things the right way at the Justice Department versus how it was done before. Anything you want to add?
You want me to freeform? Oh,
yeah.
No, well, look, I would just, when we talk about the one thing I've picked up here is today 46% of all passengers fly on low-cost or ultra-low-cost carriers. That number was about 25% in the year 2000. It was about 4% around this time of deregulation. So more people are flying on these other low-cost carriers and low-cost carriers than ever before, which is an opportunity. I would just caution, I know the 75, 80% has been thrown around. You have to be careful. That can be miles traveled. That can be number of flights. But when you look at actual number of passengers, They have about 50% of their low-cost and ultra-low-cost carriers, and that's a great thing,
Yep.
right? That increased competition with low-cost pricing has forced the big guys to create low-cost models that they traditionally didn't have to allow, again, more competition for lower-income families.
Imagine that, competition in the marketplace.
It works.
Imagine that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Rose, notwithstanding those political comments you made at the end of your opening statement, as a professor, would you say that the number one challenge that creates an antitrust situation is not lack of competition, but is the, in fact, barrier to entry? In other words, if someone begins to assert some benefit from a monopoly or near monopoly, it is in fact the barrier to entry that keeps others from coming in, whatever that barrier is. Is that a basic principle of economics and antitrust?
I teach my students that there are 3 issues.
Ma'am, that was a yes or no, if you don't mind.
Oh, then no.
Oh, okay. Mr. Stout, I'm going to go for a differing opinion. The fact that Spirit's gates are all being sold off to competitors, is that in fact, by definition, as great or greater a barrier to entry than in fact the consolidation under the previously asked for one or the other mergers would have been? Meaning that the gates that were not shared, the gates that were expanded, the ability of, and we'll just take JetBlue as the example, those gates were a major factor, not the aircraft, not the pilots, all of which are important, but ultimately access to routes and bases and operations, in fact, are sometimes the hardest to get at the most desirable airports. Isn't that true?
From my understanding, that's correct.
And so as we're looking at antitrust relative to aviation, and I'm going to go to the governor in a moment, we are looking at whether the opportunity for competition is there every bit as much as the professor's narrow theory that a entity that was losing money because they said we'd like to turn around, we hope to turn around, we have a plan to turn around, somehow was a perfectly good reason to take a money-losing airline and not sell it to an airline that might, in the combination, make money.
Your question is allowing competitors to enter, would that have helped offset some of the concerns about that transaction? Is that correct?
Correct.
I believe that's correct.
Secondly, in your opening statement, you said something I think that was very profound. Every time we in Washington or our agencies create new rules, new nice-to-have, socially interesting and responsible rules, we do not disfavor the large airlines. We, in fact, hurt the very entities like Sprint that want to offer a low budget and do not necessarily have the means of a United or American. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Thank you. Governor, welcome. For more than 12 years, you led a state successfully. You're now looking at a myriad of companies that are struggling against international competition. Now, this is an antitrust hearing, and we will focus on that more than anything else today. If, in fact, the relevant market are the domestic airlines, the 4 plus a plethora of smaller airlines, and we ignore global giants, including ones backed by their governments, do we, in fact, almost guarantee the demise of the U.S.-based airline industry as we know it?
You absolutely have to keep in mind that when you look at the worldwide market, you have so many actors out there that are state-sponsored, they're state-supported, state-subsidized, they aren't free markets, and again, to ignore that fact on a competitive basis would definitely be to our demise. We are competing against entire governments. As individual airlines, we're effectively competing against the financial wherewithal of entire governments.
Now, I'm going to touch on the same subject that I didn't get the answer I wanted from the professor on. If we, the federal government, using our ability to lean into expanding routes, modernization, and places to put the aircraft when they're on the ground. If we modernize that and make there more of them available, will we inherently give an ability for entrance to new and competitive airlines?
Absolutely. I think Breeze is a good example. I don't represent Breeze, but Breeze is a fairly new airline opening up at gates that might not be traditional airports, but gate access and slot access and competition there is very important.
Thank you. Mr. Stout, with the remaining time, should this committee look at referring to the other committees of jurisdiction, the idea that we do lean into that and we also look at the barriers created by overregulation, maybe even a two-tier system to allow smaller airlines to waive those large mandates?
I think that's right. I think if we find ways to introduce markets into slot access, that we could have a lot of pro-competitive benefits.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back and now recognize the
Professor Rose, their bankruptcy filings admit that it was untenable fuel costs that led to their downfall. And the impact of Trump's reckless war extends beyond Spirit. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics reported that airlines paid nearly $6.5 billion in fuel costs in April of 2026, which is 78% higher than what they paid a year before the war began. Isn't that right, Mr. Sununu?
No, it's not right.
Okay, well, isn't it correct that airlines could not absorb the added cost of the Iran war and the price of jet fuel, and so that's why they had to raise prices over 30%?
Oh, the airlines as a whole, yes, sir. Sorry, but Spirit Airlines was in major financial distress years before the issue in Iran, though.
But Iran pushed them over the brink, though.
Two months of increased fuel costs did not sink Spirit. That's not what sunk Spirit.
Well, it certainly wasn't the
pricing. Last year, Ranking Member Nadler and I demanded answers after Delta executives indicated that they were partnering with an Israeli AI pricing company to adopt surveillance-based pricing. Governor Sununu, let me ask you, do any of your members charge individualized prices to consumers based on personal information like purchase history, web browsing behavior, geolocation, social media activity, or financial status?
100% absolutely not. Surveillance pricing is different than dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing, virtually every industry uses. Surveillance pricing, as you pointed out, looks at personal information, and we absolutely do not participate in that.
Well, since these companies claim that they're not engaged in surveillance pricing, would Airlines for America support legislation banning this practice?
Banning surveillance pricing? 100%. Yes. Yeah, it's terrible.
So if you're not going to adopt surveillance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here. Listened carefully to the questioning, the back and forth. As always, it's been informative, and listened to our friends on the other side who have talked a great deal about fuel costs. And I think I'd like to take up that line of discussion, Governor, perhaps with you, knowing that you most directly reflect through your folks the views of the industry. I would hope the answer to this question is no, but Governor, would it surprise you?
No.
Thank you very much. That's good.
Sorry.
Best witness I've had all day. That's good. Would it surprise you to know that jet fuel prices on average at the height of the war in Iran were the same as they were in April of 2022?
No.
And of course, in April of 2022, we were about 2 months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Isn't that right?
There was a brief spike there, yes.
And it was only 3 months after April of 2022, in July of 22, that the merger of JetBlue and Spirit was publicly proposed. Isn't that right?
I believe that's right.
So at the time the antitrust reviewers in the prior administration began their consideration and ultimately review of the merger, didn't they know, or shouldn't they have known, that fuel price spikes were not only a possibility but a recent reality?
I would imagine so, yes.
Would they have taken that into account in their review?
I would have hoped so, yeah.
Would airline managers, leadership, have taken that into account in their planning for the future survivability of their firms?
Yes, and I would just say each of the airlines kind of hedges against fuel in very different ways, and some of them don't hedge at all. I mean, they used to hedge, they don't quite anymore in terms of how they manage their risk, but they all manage that risk profile differently.
So let me talk a little bit about fuel prices, Governor, and it's because it's been so central to today's discussion. I think it's very relevant. Going forward, there are going to be future fuel price spikes through international events, through other market factors. It is going to happen, as it happened in April of 22, and it happened again within the last 6 months or so. Something will happen down the road. And so as airline leadership managers, whether they're from the big four, from the mid-sized, or from the small planes, they all pay the same fuel prices, don't they, Governor?
Relatively, yes.
And so they all have to consider planning to sort of hedge against that risk of a spike in prices, isn't that right?
They all plan. Yeah, they have to plan, that's for sure.
So as they're planning, do they take into account ways that they might be able to mitigate the price of jet fuel going forward?
Yep, yes, they do, and they all do it a little bit differently.
Would that include a discussion of alternate forms of jet fuel that might be coming onto the market in ways that are commercially relevant?
Of course, they're all big believers and users in SAF, as you know, and that continues to rise.
So let's talk about SAF just a little bit. It's obviously an interest of ours in farm country. We care a lot about it. But we care about it not only because it helps our producers and it helps our local economies when it's produced domestically and the investment comes here, but also because it helps our consumers who are ultimately flying on the aircraft that have the potential. Can you share with us a little bit about how a mature domestic SAF industry at scale could have an effect on the planning for airlines to be more competitive, including price competitive for consumers?
Sure. So I think as the industry matures, the economics get better and better, right? Because like any fairly new technology, and it is a fairly new introduction into the industry, it starts out fairly costly, lots of new, I won't say barriers to entry, but costs, R&D. All of our airlines are investing in various forms of research and development to make SAF more accessible, easier to produce, whatever it may be, trying to get more companies that actually make, giving more time for more companies that actually make SAF to come onto the market. I actually just met with one of the largest SAF manufacturers, and they're building a brand new plant. They're expanding. So there's no doubt that over time, prices should definitely come down, be much more competitive with standard jet fuels, and provide more options potentially as you may see severe spikes in the future.
Are there ways that Congress could better partner with the industry to help that transition to scale occur?
Look, any sort of infrastructure investment, I would say for airlines in particular, some of the investments we look at are the transportation, right? You have your own transportation system for SAF because you're not mixing it with other traditional jet fuels. Permitting reforms to make sure that we can build and develop, whether it's folks that want to develop SAF or the pipelines to move SAF from point A to point B, or getting storage tanks approved at various airports. That's one of the bigger barriers because you need kind of a whole separate system for it. So that requires a lot more infrastructure. So permitting and investment in that infrastructure would be very helpful.
And these are discussions that will involve everybody in the industry, except Spirit, right? It's not relevant to them anymore.
Not anymore, unfortunately. Yeah.
Chairman, I yield back.
Now recognize gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you on the panel for being here today. Governor Sununu, thank you for coming to testify today, and I want to take just a moment to talk about the past interactions Congress has had with the airline industry, and we've already touched on it this morning that Congress passed the Deregulation Act in 1978, and the goal was free up the airline industry from the burdensome, inefficient government boards that dictated the fares, routes, and new entry to the market. I'd really like to know from your experience, how did the Airline Deregulation Act change the way, in your mind, that the airline industry is regulated, and how did that deregulation really benefit customers?
Well, again, it opens up a true free market as opposed to having the government decide what the fares are going to be and who can have what routes. And free market competition works without a doubt. And the proof in that is just let's go to pricing. I'm a big believer that nothing shows competition more than the price. So in the late 70s, let's call it what it was. Basically, rich white people could fly in a plane, right? Today, almost any American, through a variety of different ways, can afford to fly from point A to point B. We have ultra low-cost carriers, we have multiple routes, we have more competition if you want to go to, and that's the other definition of competition that's very important here. It's not just the overall number of carriers, it's when I go to buy a ticket, I have 4 or 5 or 6 carriers going from Wichita to Dallas. So now they're all competing on that exact same route, and we have more competition per route than ever before. And that is allowed now, right? Because they can compete freely, and it's not the government saying, well, you're going to go here and you're going to go there. So on pricing alone, it has been a game changer. On low income and everyday Americans, it's been an absolute game changer. On the ability for the airlines themselves to create their own models. One of the challenges I would say that Spirit has, they had a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of reasons Spirit went bankrupt. But one of the challenges was, some of the bigger carriers said, we're going to compete. We're going to provide a basic economy ticket that we didn't provide before at a very low cost level. And the government doesn't get involved in the economics of that to provide more options. So it isn't just one carrier for low-income families or folks that don't have none of the money to spend the extra frills. So more carriers were competing at a lower cost level. That's all because of the deregulation opportunities that came from the late 70s.
So in that same vein, in what ways would you say, I know part of this hearing is looking at when to regulate and when not to regulate or deregulate. In what ways do you think Congress, maybe specifically, could further deregulate the airline industry in order to benefit the consumers?
I think one area where the airlines have taken a clear position, first, the airlines do a lot for their customers, right? They put over $1 billion of their own money in compensation. They already have massive refund policies. And please understand, there's a big difference between a refund, your flight didn't take off, you get your money back, and compensation, which is like the punitive penalty. The airlines and some of the regulatory proposals that we've seen in the past basically said, we're going to penalize you for acts of God. There's a huge weather storm, the plane didn't take off, you now have to provide not just a refund, but compensation on top of that, right? An airline wanted to change their tail number for a certain reason. Oh, that's a canceled flight. No, the flight isn't canceled, we're just changing tail number. Nope, the previous administration said, no, that's going to be a count against you. So it's things that are out of our control, which then burden us, which ultimately those costs probably get passed down to the consumer. That's been the hardest part. We're an industry that has an average profit margin of 4.5%. Virtually every dollar the airlines make go back into airports and better products and all that sort of thing. So additional regulation, right? There's some regulations have value, all regulations have cost, right? And so you have to understand that the pros and the cons there, and those costs ultimately, unfortunately, would probably have to go down to a lot to the customer. So more regulation can be very burdensome for the customer in terms of cost.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ravitch, in my final minute here, I want to touch base with you on this topic of cabotage, if I may, and referring to the practice of a foreign air carrier operating between two U.S. airports. Under current law, I'm told the United States only allows for cabotage when authorized by the Secretary of Transportation. How might cabotage increase competition and benefit consumers, Mr. Ravitch?
Congressman, thank you for the question. So cabotage is a maritime term, the concept being that a foreign carrier can operate domestically. So British Airways could fly from Tampa to Toledo or something. Mm-hmm. So you would have competition. You'd have more firms in the marketplace potentially, perhaps an infusion of capital, and all of the competition that flows therefrom. The issue, of course, is what's already been referred to, which is how those carriers are subsidized or sponsored. There's some national security concerns, but it is something worthwhile, I think, to at least explore and understand how you might get more firms into the marketplace.
Very good. Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We now recognize. I was just going to utilize my 5 minutes to ask two more questions. Governor Sununu, this is a topic that came up a couple times. Just dig into this a little bit more. At the slot-controlled airports, the incumbent carriers benefit by, it's kind of a use it or lose it system, right?
That's right.
Do you think does the slot system harm competition because of the way it's kind of designed?
No, well, a couple things. So when a smaller carrier wants a slot, that's kind of worked out between the carrier and the airport itself. And if the carrier isn't happy or feels like they're being unfairly treated, there is an appeals process up to the FAA that they can use. Okay. But that's really a carrier airport type decision. I would argue and let you know that more slots are allocated to low-cost carriers today than ever before, right? So they have and are continue to grow capacity. Right. So yeah, I mean the slots, and by the way, not every airport is slotted. That's another thing to be aware of. Okay. Some airports are, some airports aren't. Okay. You know, one of the things I've learned in this industry is there's a saying: if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. And that's in terms of its structure, their management, their slot system, how they allocate, and the infrastructure and the airlines coming into it. So everyone is truly taken unique. But we want again, we want that broad variety. I represent a lot of airlines, right? I want everybody to have a fair shot at that pie.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Ravitch, what's your take on the slot system and the impact it has on overall operations nationwide?
Chairman, I do think you've identified an issue that's worth the attention of this committee. As Governor Sununu rightly points out, A4A even has a diverse constituency, right? There's no sort of monolithic airline industry, so they even compete with one another, and they don't agree necessarily. Some of these airlines want the other airline slots, even with United and American, the big airlines. So I think there is some anti-competitive pressure or tendencies in slots and gates that does need evaluation. And I should refer to, I think, pending legislation, right, in the Senate with the Gateway Access law, which does have some merit to it.
Let's break down a long House Judiciary hearing on competition in the airline business. 7 members questioned a panel of witnesses about a simple question with a complicated answer. Is flying in America getting less competitive, and if so, who pays for it? The short version from both parties is that the person who pays is you, the passenger. Before we get to the members, set the stage. Over the last 2 decades, American air travel went from a crowded field of carriers to a market run by a handful of giants. That single fact sits underneath almost every complaint you'll hear in this hearing. Here's the frame to hold on to. The industry's message is that the market is healthy and fares reflect real costs. The members kept pointing at things a passenger can't control: mergers, bankruptcies, airport slots, fuel fees, and new pricing tools. This breakdown keeps the score from the passenger seat. One more ground rule. A fact check isn't about rooting for or against airlines. It's about separating what's proven from what's spin, and marking who carries the risk when the two sides disagree. On most of the day's biggest points, the record leans one way. Start with how we got here, because it explains everything after it. American aviation didn't drift into consolidation by accident. It happened in a fast wave of mergers. Between 2008 and 2013, the number of major network airlines fell from 9 to 4. Delta absorbed Northwest in 2008. United merged with Continental in 2010. Southwest bought AirTran in 2011, and American combined with U.S. Airways in 2013. 4 deals, and the map was redrawn. Here's where that leaves the market today. 4 airlines, American, Delta, United, and Southwest, control roughly 3/4 of all U.S. sea capacity. In much of the country, your practical choice on a given route is between 2 or 3 of them, not a dozen. And this isn't just a talking point. Most independent studies of those mergers found the same thing. In the short run, on many routes, they reduced competition and pushed fares up. Regulators demanded some asset sales to soften it, but the direction was clear. So keep this tension in mind for the whole hearing. Consolidation can make airlines more efficient and more stable, which is real. But it also removes the head-to-head rivalry that forces prices down. Efficiency for the airline and less leverage for the passenger are 2 sides of the same merger. And the pressure isn't easing. Reports indicate regulators have signaled openness to further consolidation among the big carriers, with some analyses warning it could lift fares by 5 to 10% on affected routes. That's the backdrop the members were reacting to. Which brings us to the sharpest exchange of the day from Congressman Jim Jordan about a merger regulator stopped and the airline that died anyway. Jordan's challenge was blunt, and it's a fair one to examine. Here are the facts. In early 2024, a federal court blocked JetBlue's $3.8 billion purchase of Spirit on antitrust grounds. The court accepted the argument that combining them would reduce competition and raise fares, especially for budget travelers. Then the part Jordan pressed on. After the deal fell apart, Spirit filed for bankruptcy protection not once but twice, in late 2024 and again in the summer of 2025. The discount airline that spent years undercutting the majors was suddenly fighting to survive. This one is genuinely two-sided, so here's the honest read. One view, blocking the merger stranded Spirit and hurt competition. The other, the merger itself would have erased a low-fare airline whose entire purpose was undercutting the giants. Either path removes a discounter. That's the part passengers feel. It's also fair to say the merger wasn't Spirit's only problem. An engine recall grounded many of its jets for months. Travelers drifted toward roomier seats. Costs climbed after the pandemic, so blaming regulators alone oversimplifies it. But the through line still holds. A fare cutter is disappearing. Why does one discounter matter so much? Because of something economists call the Spirit effect, or the Southwest effect before it. When a low-cost carrier enters a route, the big airlines on that route tend to cut their fares to compete. Take the discounter away, and that discipline goes with it. So the fact check on Jordan's point is a split decision. He's right that blocking the merger didn't save Spirit, but the deeper problem he's circling isn't the court. It's a market where a budget airline can't survive between four giants. That's a competition problem whichever way the merger had gone. Congressman Darrell Issa moved from one failed airline to the bigger question, why can't new airlines just show up and compete the fares down? In most industries, high prices attract new competitors. In aviation, the door is bolted. To fly, an airline needs gates to load passengers and slots, the permission to take off and land. At the busiest airports, both are scarce, and the incumbents already hold nearly all of them. There's a second lock on the door. Foreign airlines are barred from flying passengers between two U.S. cities, a rule called cabotage, and foreign ownership of a U.S. airline is capped, so the competition that disciplines other industries, cheaper players from abroad, is kept out by law. Issa's framing is the pro-competition one, and it lands. The barrier isn't that new airlines can't offer lower fares, it's that they can't get the physical and legal access to try. A market that blocks new entrants doesn't discipline the incumbents that are already in it. And history backs him up. Nearly every airline that has meaningfully lowered fares, from Southwest decades ago to the ultra-low-cost carriers more recently, had to claw its way past exactly these barriers. When the barriers win, the fare cutters never get off the ground. Congressman Chuy Garcia raised the newest front in this fight, and maybe the most personal one, not just how many airlines there are, but how they decide what to charge you specifically. Garcia's concern was about a price tag that studies you back before it tells you the number. Here's what's actually happening. Delta has been testing an AI-driven pricing system, already used on about 3% of its flights, with a stated plan to expand it toward 20%. The Federal Trade Commission has a specific name for this kind of individualized pricing, surveillance pricing. The distinction matters. Dynamic pricing, where a fare rises as a flight fills up, has existed for decades and applies to everyone. Personalized pricing is different. It aims to set a number for you based on signals like your device, your browsing history, and estimates of your income. The worry, and it's bipartisan, is that this lets an airline nudge your fare toward your personal limit, the most it believes you'll pay before you walk away. Senators from both parties wrote to the airline, and House members introduced a bill to ban setting prices from Americans' personal data. In fairness, here's the airline side. Delta says it does not and will not target customers with individual prices based on personal data, so there's a real dispute about what the technology is doing today versus what it could do. But the reason lawmakers reacted is the direction of travel. And step back to see why this connects to everything else. Personalized pricing works best when you have nowhere else to go. In a competitive market, a price aimed at your limit sends you to a rival. In the consolidated one, there's no rival to run to. Fewer airlines make surveillance pricing more powerful. Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia turned to costs, tying the price of a ticket to the price of fuel and to foreign policy. Here's the fair version. Jet fuel is one of an airline's single largest and most volatile costs, often a quarter or more of expenses. Tension in the Middle East can move oil prices quickly, and that flows into fares. So Johnson's link between global events and your ticket is real. But a witness on the panel, former Governor Sununu, pushed back on pinning a specific price jump on one particular policy, and that caution is also fair. Fuel prices have many drivers. The honest fact check, fuel is genuinely volatile and policy sensitive, but no single policy explains a given month's number. Congressman Derek Schmidt of Kansas stayed on fuel, and on the search for something steadier, sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel is meant to cut both emissions and dependence on volatile oil markets. The promise is real, but today it's scarce and expensive, a tiny fraction of what airlines burn, so it is not yet a shield against fuel spikes. It's a long-term hope, not a near-term fix. And here's how fuel ties back to the day's theme. When fuel spikes, every airline hurts, but the thin margin discounters hurt first and worst. High, unpredictable fuel is one more force pushing the low-cost carriers, the ones that keep fares honest, toward the edge. Now, a thread that runs under the whole hearing, even when no one names it directly, the fees. Because the sticker price of a ticket is no longer the price you pay. Consider the scale. Baggage and ticket change fees alone brought U.S. Airlines about $8.3 billion in a single recent year. And baggage fee revenue grew more than 30% over a 4-year stretch, far faster than the airline's overall revenue. This is what unbundling means. Services that used to come with your ticket, a checked bag, a seat next to your kid, the ability to change plans got pulled out and priced separately. The advertised fare looks low, the real cost arrives one add-on at a time. Regulators noticed. A federal rule now requires airlines to disclose these fees up front, a change estimated to save travelers over $500 million a year. A Senate investigation called the fees unpredictable and designed around the travelers' confusion rather than their convenience. So connect it to competition. In a crowded market, hidden fees get punished because a clear arrival wins the customer. In a consolidated one, everyone can play the same game. Fewer airlines make junk fees safer to charge and harder to escape. Congressman Mark Harris went back to the root of all of it, the 1978 law that remade American flying, for better and for worse. For context, before 1978, the federal government set airline fares and routes directly. The Airline Deregulation Act ended that, letting airlines compete on price and pick their own destinations. It was one of the biggest free market experiments in American history. And the results genuinely cut both ways. On the upside, fares fell over time, and flying went from a luxury to something tens of millions of ordinary people could afford. That's a real, lasting win, and it's why deregulation still has strong defenders. But the same freedom that lowered fares also unleashed waves of mergers, concentrated traffic into a few fortress hubs, and thinned or ended service to many smaller cities. Some towns that had airline service in 1978 have little or none today. That's the cost side of the bargain. There's even a program that exists because of it, called Essential Air Service, which subsidizes flights to small communities that the free market abandoned. Its very existence is an admission that pure deregulation left some Americans stranded. Harris's history lesson is really a lesson about the present. Chairman Scott Fitzgerald closed on the quiet mechanism that decides who actually gets to fly, the airport slot system. At a handful of the country's busiest airports like Reagan National, LaGuardia, and Kennedy, the number of flights is capped, and each takeoff or landing is a slot. Those slots are finite, valuable, and mostly held by the incumbent airlines that have had them for years. So here's the competition problem hidden inside a scheduling rule. A new low-fare airline can have the planes, the crews, and the lower prices, and still not be able to fly to a major market simply because it can't get a slot. The barrier isn't the fare, it's the runway. And slots rarely change hands in ways that help newcomers. They get traded, leased, and swapped among the big carriers, and sometimes hoarded to keep rivals out. Fitzgerald flagging the slot system is really flagging one of the most effective and least visible barriers to airline competition. Here's a piece most passengers never see, and it reframes the whole thing, how the big airlines actually make their money now. The big carriers now run enormous loyalty programs, and they sell miles in bulk to banks that put them on credit cards. Analysts have valued some of those mileage programs as worth more than the airlines that own them. In other words, the flying is almost the side business. And loyalty is competition's quiet enemy. Miles, status, and companion perks are designed to lock you to one carrier, so you stop comparing prices across airlines. A customer who won't shop around is a customer the airline doesn't have to underprice. That's the point of the program. Now, in fairness, let's state the airline's best case as strongly as it can be made, because it's not nothing. The strongest defense is this: adjusted for inflation, average airfares today are lower than they were in the regulated era. More Americans fly than ever, and U.S. aviation is astonishingly safe. By those measures, the system delivers. A fair fact check has to put that on the table. But here's why that doesn't close the case. Those gains were largely front-loaded in the decades right after deregulation. The recent trend, the one this hearing was about, points the other way. Rising fees, shrinking seats, a collapsing discounter, and pricing built from your data. The level is good, the direction is the worry. There's also a hidden layer to service. The majors outsource many smaller routes to regional airlines flying under their names. Squeezed budgets and a shortage of pilots have thinned those regional networks, which is a big reason some small cities keep losing flights. One genuine bright spot for consumers: a recent federal rule now requires airlines to give automatic cash refunds when they cancel or significantly delay your flight, instead of nudging you toward a voucher. It's proof that targeted rules can shift the balance back toward the passenger. So let's pull the whole herring together because the individual threads all lead to the same place. On structure, 9 major carriers became 4, and those 4 now hold about 3/4 of seats. On entry, gates, slots, and ownership rules keep new competitors out. Those 2 facts alone shake the price of nearly every ticket in America. On price, the discounter that undercut the majors is collapsing. Hidden fees have grown into billions, and airlines are testing prices built from your personal data. 3 different tools, all pointing the same way at checkout. None of this tells you how to vote. You can believe blocking the JetBlue Spirit merger was the wrong call, or the right one. You can favor deregulation or want it revisited. The narrow, nonpartisan point is about direction. Fewer competitors and smarter pricing tools do not tend to make a ticket cheaper. And notice what made this hearing unusual. It wasn't a party fight. A conservative like Jim Jordan and a progressive like Chuy Garcia were circling the same worry from different sides. When the left and the right both land on less competition, that's usually a sign the problem is real. So where does it leave us? With a market shrinking toward a few big players, the disruptors dying off, the fees multiplying, and new tools aimed at charging each traveler a little bit more. That's the pattern the hearing kept circling, and it's the one worth watching. Watch 4 things from here. Whether any new low-fare airline can actually win slots at the big airports. Whether Congress moves to ban pricing built from your personal data. Whether the fee rules survive and expand. And whether fares keep climbing as the discounters fade. Those answers will come on the record. That is our breakdown. Stay with us.